Thanks, Nath. Tonight we are thinking about victory. And there's been some great sporting victory in recent years, hasn't there? So there was Ben Stokes in 2019 taking the World Cup final to a super over, smashing sixes all over the park to win it for England. Emma Raducanu, our very own judge at Sports Plus this summer, becoming the youngest British player to win a championship at the US Open. Tiger Woods, did you watch that? Tiger Woods, who was he? People said, came back from nowhere to win the Masters in 2019. Olympic victories, Paralympic victories, the Commonwealth Games this summer, the GB hockey girls winning gold, that was one of my favourites. And then, of course, there was this victory. The Lionesses. Joy and excitement in living rooms all around England. Finally, football came home, we lifted the trophy, and those were the scenes in our home. The excitement was palpable. I'm sure it was for you as well. See, victories like that, they fill us with joy. We celebrate them. We talk about them. Well, tonight, we're going to be thinking about a far greater victory than any of those. A victory that still fills billions of people with joy. A victory that is still celebrated. And a victory that is talked about still all around the world. It is the victory of the King, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead that Nath just read to us then. You see, if there's one thing we can be sure of in life, it is that we will die. Death isn't something we really like to talk about. Death feels horrid. It's final, and I know some of you will know that aching sadness and grief when someone close to you dies. I remember well the first time that someone close to me died, my aunt, when she was just 50. A few years ago, I sat at the bedside of my mother-in-law as she slowly slipped away from us to cancer. A good friend of mine in London has a son who's the same age as my son, who died unexpectedly. Then there's all the death we see on the TV. How many deaths from COVID today? A war in Ukraine. It goes on and on. Death isn't something that we like to talk about. It's horrible, but it's there. So imagine if there was something or someone that could beat death. Imagine if death in the end was not the winner. Well, look with me at the words of the angel in our reading again tonight. Do not be afraid. He is not here. He is risen. You see, death will always be hard, awful, and tragic unless this verse is true. Unless Jesus really did rise from the dead. Then we can look at death, not with fear, but with real, living hope. So is it true? Did Jesus beat death? Grab your Gospels, get it in front of you, turn to the last page. We're at the climax of this story, chapter 28. Remember where we've got to? Jesus had died. His body was taken down from the cross, wrapped in linen cloth. And there were these chief priests and Pharisees at the time, folk that didn't really like Jesus much. They didn't like what Jesus was saying. And they had heard Jesus say that after 3 days he would rise again. So they were worried that his disciples would stage a resurrection. This is what people thought might happen. Oh, the disciples are going to break into the tomb, you know. They're going to take Jesus' body and make it look like he rose again. So they went to Pilate. They told Pilate what they thought, and Pilate said, fine, okay, sure. Get a massive stone, put that in front of his grave. Oh, and some of your strongest, finest Roman soldiers, get them to guard it. And so they did. Jesus was dead, buried, the tomb was sealed, and the tomb was guarded. And then into our story tonight come two women, Mary and Mary. Nice and easy. We've seen these women before. They loved Jesus. They had followed him from Galilee. They'd been caring for his needs. and then they'd watched him die. 3 days later, they go to visit his grave. Pretty normal behavior when someone who you love dies. But pretty normal is not the scene they find. See with me down there in verse 2. A violent earthquake, an angel with the appearance of lightning, clothes as white as snow, the massive stone rolled away, and the group of strong soldiers who'd been clearly instructed to guard the tomb no matter what. Look at them. They're now collapsed on the floor. So afraid of him, they shook and became like dead men. This was frightening, dramatic stuff. And the angel speaks to the women there in verse 5. Do not be afraid. For I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Well, let's be clear on the facts tonight, because those women were clear. The tomb was empty. Jesus was not there. Can you imagine being one of those women peering in? Do you know, back then, the witness of women didn't count for much in court. Sounds horrifying to us, now I know. But simply, this isn't something that Matthew would make up if he was trying to persuade people at the time. This was real. And if it wasn't real enough when they stared into the empty tomb, they were about to bump into Jesus when they hurried home. They see him. They touch him. This was no hallucination. This was no vision of a ghost. Jesus was really alive, physically alive. They clasped his feet, Matthew told us. And Jesus went on to appear to lots of other people. It was 40 days that he was alive on the earth. He saw 500, 11 people. People that saw him, people that touched him, people ate with him, people talked with him. Jesus was alive. He never died again. It was witnessed. And these people, these witnesses, formed the early church. They were the first people to spread the message of Jesus' death and resurrection. They were the first people to worship him and live with him as their king. And these witnesses were the first people, of many actually, to allow themselves to be beaten, imprisoned, and almost all of them actually killed for what they believed in. I wonder if you've ever thought about what you would be prepared, or who you would be prepared to die for. Surely, only something that you knew was true, right? Well, they believed the resurrection was true. They believed the words of the angel when he said, he is not here. He is risen, just as he said. I'm sure you've seen there's been lots said already about how the Lionesses' victory will change history, will change the face of women's sport, will change the face of women's football, that participation in girls' football from primary schools up is only going to increase. And I guess time will tell to what extent that change really happens. Of course, I hope it does. Well, the victory of Jesus from the dead, it has already changed history. We are at Repton 2022 because approximately 2,022 years ago, Jesus Christ was born and went on to die, and they claim rose again. His body's never been found. History was changed by the events of that first Easter. Resurrection is the central claim of the Christian faith. Okay, and if you're still maybe trying to decide whether you are a Christian tonight, then I want to challenge you with this. Work out whether you believe the resurrection is true. Because if it is, if the facts add up, then it'll change how you view life and it'll change how you view death. Let me give you 3 quick reasons why that is. You see, if the resurrection is true, then we can be sure that Jesus really is the Son of God. Ordinary people do not rise from the dead. However good and kind and powerful and inspiring they might be, they just don't rise from the dead. They never have and they never will. Who can beat death but God alone? Jesus really is the Son of God. And that also means we can be sure that when Jesus died on the cross, it was God. It was God who took the consequence of our sin, who took the punishment we deserve. It really is the way that we can be rescued and saved. Secondly, the resurrection is proof that Jesus will do just as he says. It's there. He says, he is risen. He is not here, just as he said, verse 6. Jesus has done just as he said. He said after 3 days he'd rise from the dead, and he did. No Roman guards, no massive stone could stop that one. Everything that Jesus has been promising in Matthew, you can trust. You can trust, even if it seems impossible, because the resurrection proves that Jesus will do and has done just as he said. Finally, and I love this, the resurrection is proof that death is not the end. I know we've mentioned it already, and death is horrid, it's sad. When someone you love is taken from you, it hurts, not seeing them, not being with them, playing with them, laughing with them. But the resurrection of Jesus from the dead proves that death is not the end. Just as Jesus physically rose from the dead, so people who believe and trust in him will also physically rise from the dead to life again. Not to a kind of another life here on earth, and not to some sort of mystical life in the sky. The Bible tells us that people will rise from the dead, just as Jesus did, to new bodies and into a new heaven and a new earth, where the Bible tells us there will be no crying, no pain, no more death. God's people will be with God's King, Jesus, forever. And it will be amazing. Death is not the end. My friend who lost her son when he was just 6 has a very raw and ongoing grief, of course, and I can't imagine. But she says her only hope in that terrible sadness of her son no longer being with them is her belief in Jesus' death and resurrection, because she is confident that her little boy will rise to new life again with Jesus. He will run again. He will play sport again. And actually, he will never hurt again. Never cry. Never be disappointed or let down. Her son will live again forever, face to face with Jesus. I mentioned my aunt died. I was 16. I remember the emotions and the confusion amongst my cousins and family well. Her funeral was packed, and my dad had to speak, and he got up and spoke on these words of the angel. Don't be afraid. He is not here. He is risen. But as he came to the end of his talk about my aunt, it was this that really stuck with me. He said, Sarah believed in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, and so now we believe that Sarah is also risen with Jesus in heaven. No pain, at peace. And if there is one thing I think she'd want to say to us all today at her funeral, it would be this. It's true. It's true. It's true. And he just walked down from the stage. Do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Do you believe that he is the Son of God, that you are forgiven, loved, and that death is not the end? Do you believe it's true? Your leaders do. Your coaches do. Some of you will have parents or friends that do. The women in our passage tonight, they do. And do you know how they respond? Look with me at verse 8 to 9. So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. afraid, yet filled with joy. They worshipped him. As you look at the victory of our King tonight, you can know real joy in life. And joy isn't a feeling of just kind of constant happiness and charging around your living room like you did when the Lionesses won. No, joy isn't a feeling that means you'll never worry and never be afraid of anything again. Joy is something that means deep down you know that no matter what happens, and sad things will happen, including death, but joy is that no matter what happens, you can trust in Jesus' victory. He has beaten sin and death. When he died and when he rose, when he walked out of that tomb, you can have a living hope and joy that one day you too will live in heaven forever with Jesus. That is why the women worshipped him. Did you see? They dropped to their knees when they saw him. They clasped his feet. They worshipped him. Afraid, yes, still, of course, after everything they'd seen, but filled with joy. Will you worship the risen King? Will you trust him with your life and with your death? I certainly hope so and pray so tonight, because it's true. It's true. It's true.